Fischbach for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And Mr. St. Ange, in your testimony, you mentioned the challenges for entrance into the processing market, I believe, such as achieving the economies of scale necessary to compete. An additional factor as well that that we've been seeing in the Ag Committee is the incredible capital costs that it takes to even start a modestly sized meat processor. These are expensive pieces of equipment that go into the facilities. And can you expand further on those challenges for a new entrant into the processing industry?
Mr. Mann may know the processing industry better. In general, the compliance costs, setup costs, all of these are far harder for smaller entrants. This is true not only in food production, this is really true. It's true in retailing, it's true across the economy. And in terms, of course, what we're discussing today has the potential to raise not only the compliance and the regulatory risks, or costs, but also risks on top of that, right? If a firm is sort of afraid of coloring outside the lines and getting into a lot of trouble for that, then they can often end up taking choices that are not only bad for the business, but could actually be bad for the consumer. So an example of that is that a company might be actually afraid to offer customer discounts because they're afraid of running afoul of some requirement.
Well, and maybe since you mentioned Mr. Mann, do you have anything to add to or respond to that question regarding the processing?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. First of all, I would point out that there's been copious studies on the meatpacking industry, on its history and economic consequences. And it's pretty remarkable how consistently they find that there has been increased concentration. I don't think anyone can deny that. That increased concentration correlates with some increase in market power. And yet there has been such an increase in efficiencies that it dwarfs the potential harm from exercise of market power. It's part of there are lots of speculation about exactly what the source of those efficiencies are. Everyone agrees that larger meat processing plants is more efficient, no question about that, but that doesn't inherently mean that many plants have to be owned by one company. So there's a lot of speculation about economies of scope, and there's a lot of research to suggest that there are some. I'll give you one example. If you are able to process and sell meat products from multiple different species, and you're selling to a wholesaler that's interested in buying meat products from many different species, you may have a much easier time negotiating with them. The marketing margin that the wholesaler earns may be smaller, all because you have access to a wider range of types of supply. And that's just one of many, many examples.
Well, and maybe it's a yes or no question, but are any of those challenges that are faced by the meat processors and getting into the business and are any of those related to matters of antitrust policy?
Let's see. Difficulties getting into the business are not related to antitrust policies.
So expand, I guess.
The regulation, though.
Okay, and maybe you could expand a little bit on the regulation. That was going to be one of the other questions that I asked about the kinds of the challenges of regulation and how that deals with the supply chain.
Yeah, so I mean, I think again there may be perfectly good justifications for this. Obviously, safety of the food supply is very important. But one consequence of that is absolutely extraordinarily high compliance costs. I would point out, for example, that the recent Biden USDA announcement of $1 billion or so to support small businesses in the meatpacking industry, a chunk of that is specifically goes to defraying the cost of compliance with USDA inspections and other regulations. Now, it is a very real cost, and certainly that makes a lot of sense, actually. It's the one element of that proposal that makes some sense. Actually, what doesn't make sense is why you don't do that for all providers, because of course those costs apply even, an even greater level to a larger processor. But yes, it's very real, and it certainly impedes entry at the margin. I don't know exactly how much, but certainly at the margin, it would impede entry.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman, you back. I now recognize the gentleman from Maryland, the distinguished